right, so I am doing a bit of a podcast to really just clarify why I chose psychedelics and psychiatry, and just pull out the salient points and use a more personal lens, and personal experience of why I think it's important to our practice, and to kind of educate you guys on the fact that this is an up and coming frontier, if you will. It's not new, but it is certainly becoming more and more relevant for our practice. And so, the psychedelics have been part of human practice, human use for who knows how long. Shamans from moons and moons ago used these elements in their religious practices, and likely in healing practices as well. But for our purposes, the more formal study of psychedelic science really started back in, I would say, like the 1930s, with it was a creation of LSD, and it was synthesized back in 1938, and became more well known through the 40s, and then there were studies done, and then from that point forward, and looking at other more traditional medicines, and by the 60s and the 70s. As you know, the flower children were smoking dope, doing LSD, magic mushrooms. That whole thing was going on, as well as the Vietnam War. And what ended up happening was a bit of a political warfare, and psychedelics got caught in the crossfire. And because so many of the individuals that were using and being encouraged to use by even a Harvard professor was who got fired, was encouraging kind of a rebellion against the system, and the use of LSD to open the mind. And this was really a very political this was a political firestorm that ended up being, bringing about the war on drugs. And in 1970, the Controlled Substance Act was passed, which then classified LSD and other psychedelics as Schedule I drugs, which means there is no, medical use. And this was their way of squashing the outcry against the establishment, because those people who were using these substances were kind of gaining access to these insights and to this almost mystical experiences of recognizing, the oneness of humanity. And that becomes extremely difficult when a draft is being undertaken to send our people overseas to kill other people. And so you had the Love Not War movement, and again, psychedelics got caught in the crossfire, so it was outlawed. On the underground, and those scientists and people, who were a little more forward thinking, did find ways to continue their studies. And by 2006, the U.S. Religious Freedom Restoration Act permitted the use of psychedelics as in the context of religious practices. And so, slowly but surely, we started to reintroduce the study and use of psychedelics. So that's kind of a bit of the history of this. There's many studies that have been ongoing by very prominent institutions, and MAPS is Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. That is a very prominent and powerful group that has lobbied tremendously for the reinstitution of this study as a legitimate science, and it has the backing of many prominent universities and scientists who are studying things. And I focused on two of the substances, which MDMA and psilocybin. And partly, my personal interest in this really is from the standpoint, and I mentioned I wanted to share this lens through which I look at the power and the usefulness of psychedelics, because I am drawn to the mystical experience, the mind broadening, breaking the mold of one's thinking, and how that meets the science of neurobiology and the neurotransmitters and the functional reboot of the brain that occurs with this serotonergic firestorm that many of these psychedelic drugs cause. And what is ultimately, we don't really understand the whole process and why exactly it works this way, but why it essentially reboots the brain when, for example, MDMA, and it works is very efficacious in treating PTSD. So a person, a war veteran, for example, who has had PTSD for years and has gone through all the therapies and has done, antidepressants and, all the things. And then they do, a few treatments with MDMA, and it allows them to enter into this safe space, a safe space that's created by the practitioner, and as well as the safe space of the medication itself, which kind of removes some of that emotional connection to the trauma, so where they can process the trauma without the defensive mechanisms, the deep ruts in the brain of thought. And I remember the firefight and the bodies that in the road, and as soon as I think of that memory, it's like a rut of reaction, physical reaction, thought reaction, belief reaction, and the MDMA just blows through all of that, kind of like smooths out the track, that rut, and they're able to look at it from a completely different perspective, and the therapist is able to help them not just in those moments, because what is taught in the psychedelic assisted therapy is to be non-interventional, but just hold space, help redirect, help provide basic comforts. But then after the session is over, then to help them integrate that experience. So this is very different from, say, the recreational use, which I do not support in terms of safety and efficacy for healing as a psychiatric medicine and tool, but rather we as providers and healers are capable of using these medicines with expertise, with knowledge of essentially the mechanisms of action, and what we know that they have been doing statistically for people, and holding space for them to re-examine their experience. And help them to integrate their insights when they come out of it, and then having, you know, session after session, but usually not many, and it usually lasts for, you know, the benefits, the efficacy can last for, with some people, for a lifetime. So it's pretty amazing. The psilocybin one, that why I was drawn to that particular medicine is because I am particularly interested in because I have a background in theology, the mystical experience. And so with people, they've looked at studies with people who who have cancer, who have anxiety related to the existential crisis of a terminal illness, and or who have recovered from cancer, but then still have to go through the yearly scans, which can bring up tremendous amounts of anxiety. So this existential crisis anxiety, and that the psilocybin has been able to help them to repattern their response, to really to see it from a completely different perspective, which again kind of goes into this like existential chaos of that we don't really understand what these experiences that people have while they're taking the psychedelics, like the realizations that they're able to have, the insights that they're able to come up with, because it just, like, you know, I've heard researchers from Yale and from Harvard and from Johns Hopkins all say, you know, use this term of rebooting the brain in some way. So it's pretty exciting, I think, and this is why I wanted to share with you the benefits. Now, in terms of, you know, okay, say you're excited about this like I am, how can I get involved? Well, we're in a place right now where the cart is a bit before the horse, because we have studies that are ongoing, and which is wonderful, and we're in phase 3 trials of using MDMA for PTSD. It's in having FDA approval for using MDMA in PTSD treatment, but these clinical trials are all taking place, you know, in a within, you know, the academic setting, and you know, how do we in Richmond get experience with that? Well, you know, I can take the training, which MAPS offers a training, as well as there's a training program out in California, CIS, and yet there, you know, you can take the training, but there's really not very many clinical sites where you can actually do the practicum. So we're kind of going to have this little push-pull until the FDA does approve these medicines more and more, and they become more available. And it's, you know, we have more sites that we can train practitioners to do psychedelic assisted therapy and hold space for people in an educated and skilled way and compassionate way. So at any rate, I hope you enjoy reading and watching, you know, the videos that I've included. And if you have any questions or thoughts or experiences you want to share with me, I'd love to hear them. And anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Thanks.